The red dust devil swirled across the barren landscape, dancing between the weathered fence posts that marked the boundary of Coulter Hayes Ranch. He stood on the porch, eyes narrowed against the afternoon sun, watching the horizon where the mesas met the endless sky. This was his kingdom of solitude, 40 miles from the nearest town of Mercy's Bend, surrounded by nothing but scorched grass, jagged rocks, and the occasional rattlesnake. Coulter had chosen this place precisely because it kept people away. The land was unforgiving, water scarce, and the summer heat could kill a man who didn't respect it, perfect for a man who had no use for company. He rolled a cigarette with practiced ease, his calloused hands steady despite the gusting wind. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw pulled tight when he squinted, a souvenir from his cavalry days that he wore like a warning to stay back. At 34, he'd already lived enough for 2 lifetimes, and most of it he'd rather forget. The small adobe house behind him was sparse but solid, built with his own hands after the war. 1 room for living, 1 for sleeping, and a lean-to kitchen. No decorations, no softness. Nothing that might remind him of what a home used to feel like when Sarah and little Emma were alive. That was before the raiders came, before he'd buried what was left of his heart alongside them in the churchyard at Fort Sumner. Inside, his Winchester hung above the stone fireplace, cleaned and loaded. His Colt .45 rested on the table next to a half-empty bottle of whiskey. These were his only companions now, the only ones that never disappointed. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through his reverie. Coulter's hand instinctively moved to his hip, though he wore no gun belt while on his own land. Through the shimmering heat waves, he could make out a rider on a paint horse, Reverend Josiah Meyer from town, his black coat flapping like crow wings. "Preacher," Coulter acknowledged when the man drew close enough, not moving from his spot on the porch. Reverend Meyer dismounted, wiping sweat from his brow with a yellowed handkerchief. "Coulter, Lord's mercy, but it's hot as Hades out here. State your business. Reverend, sun's getting low, and you've got a long ride back." The preacher reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an envelope, holding it out like it might bite. "This came for you, from the matrimonial news agency in San Francisco." Coulter's expression darkened. "That's impossible. Your name's right there, clear as day. Coulter Matthew Hayes, care of Mercy's Bend Post Office." 3 years. It had been 3 years since he'd gotten drunk enough to answer that advertisement. 3 years since he'd sent off a letter in a moment of weakness, thinking maybe he could start again, but no one had responded. Who would want a scarred, bitter man living at the edge of nowhere? He'd forgotten about it entirely. "I'm not interested," Coulter said flatly. "Now hold on," Reverend Meyer insisted, still extending the letter. "The young woman's already on her way. Should arrive at the stage depot next Tuesday." The cigarette fell from Coulter's lips. "What?" "Says so right here in the agency's letter to me. Miss Isabel Winters from Boston. Coming to marry one Coulter Hayes as per correspondence agreement. They asked me to ensure you'd be there to meet her. Send her back." "Can't do that. Son, she's already somewhere between here and Kansas by now. Besides," the Reverend's voice softened, "maybe this is Providence. You've been alone too long." "I said no." Coulter's voice carried the kind of finality that ended conversations and started gunfights. But the Reverend, bless his stubborn soul, left the letter on the porch railing anyway. "Tuesday, Coulter, 2 o'clock stage. Don't leave that poor girl stranded." After Meyer left, Coulter stared at the envelope like it was a coiled rattler. He didn't touch it until full dark, when the coyotes started their nightly chorus and the desert cold crept in. By lamplight. He read the brief note from the agency and the included letter from Miss Winters. Her handwriting was elegant but unsteady in places, as if her hand had trembled while writing. She mentioned she was 26, could cook and keep house, and was seeking a new beginning in the Western Territories. Something about the careful way she phrased things, the words she didn't say, reminded him of his own letters, full of truth but empty of the real story. He poured 3 fingers of whiskey and downed it in one burning swallow. Then he walked outside and stood under the vast carpet of stars. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and something else, rain coming from the mountains. That night, Coulter dreamed for the first time in months, not the usual nightmares of smoke and screaming, but something different. A woman's voice calling his name through morning mist, urgent and afraid. "Coulter!" she cried, again and again, until he woke with a start. Sweat-soaked and disoriented, it was still dark. He lay on his narrow cot, listening to his racing heart and the wind rattling the shutters. Just a dream, nothing more. The whiskey and that damn letter playing tricks on his mind. But when Tuesday came, Coulter found himself saddling his horse at dawn. He wore his cleanest shirt, had even trimmed his black beard and hair. As he mounted up, he cursed himself for a fool. He'd send the woman back on the next stage, give her money for the passage. This was charity, nothing more. The ride to Mercy's Bend took 4 hours through the desert heat. By the time he reached the depot, his shirt was soaked through and his mood had soured further. He tied his horse to the hitching post and leaned against the adobe wall to wait. Hat pulled low over his eyes. The stage was late. As usual, when it finally rolled in, dust-covered and creaking, Coulter straightened. The driver jumped down and began unloading baggage while passengers emerged, stiff and weary from the journey. She was the last one out. Coulter knew it was her before she even looked his way. Something in how carefully she moved, how she held herself despite the obvious exhaustion. She wore a simple gray traveling dress, wrinkled and dusty, and a bonnet that couldn't quite contain the mass of dark hair beneath. When she turned, scanning the small crowd, he saw her face clearly, beautiful in a quiet way, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of winter sage. But it was the fear there that caught him, quickly hidden behind a practiced smile. His boots seemed to move of their own accord, carrying him forward until he stood before her. Up close, he could see the shadows beneath her eyes, the way she shifted her weight as if favoring her left side. "Miss Winters?" She nodded, chin lifting slightly. "Mr. Hayes?" "Just Coulter." They stood there awkwardly while the world moved around them. Finally, he reached for her carpet bag, noting how she flinched when his hand passed too close to hers. "It's a long ride to the ranch," he said. "We should get supplies first." "Of course." At the general store, he watched her move through the aisles with careful precision, selecting only the most basic items. When the shopkeeper's wife tried to engage her in conversation, Isabel answered politely but briefly, her voice carrying a faint tremor. The ride back was mostly silent. Coulter had rented a small wagon for her trunk, and she sat beside him on the bench, hands folded tightly in her lap. Every bump in the road made her grip tighten, knuckles white against the gray fabric. "It's isolated out here," he said finally, feeling obligated to warn her. "Nearest neighbor is 15 miles. Town's a half-day ride. I prefer quiet," she replied softly. When they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, he heard her sharp intake of breath. His land looked even more desolate in the harsh afternoon light, the small adobe house squatting like a turtle shell against the vastness, the outbuildings weathered to the color of old bones. "It's not much," he said, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. But she surprised him. "It's peaceful," she murmured, and something in her voice suggested she meant it. He showed her to the small room he'd hastily cleaned that morning, his storage room. Really, but it had a window and space for a bed. "This'll be yours," he said gruffly. "My room's across the hall. You're not to enter it." She nodded, setting her carpet bag on the narrow cot. In the confined space, he caught her scent, lavender soap and something else, something sharp like fear sweat. "I'll let you settle in," he said, backing toward the door. "Supper's at sundown. Nothing fancy." "Mr. Hayes, Coulter," she called as he turned to leave. "Thank you for meeting me." He paused, not looking back. "We'll see how thankful you are after a few weeks out here." That night, they ate beans and cornbread in silence, the lamp casting long shadows across the rough wooden table. She ate slowly, mechanically, as if food was just another chore to complete. When their eyes met accidentally, she looked away quickly, color rising in her pale cheeks. After she retired to her room, Coulter sat on the porch with his whiskey, trying to make sense of the day. What kind of woman came all this way to marry a stranger? What was she running from? Because she was running, he'd stake his life on it. He recognized the signs, having run far enough himself. Near midnight, he was about to turn in when he heard it, a low moan from her room, followed by muttered words. He froze, listening. The sounds grew more urgent, distressed. Without thinking, he moved down the hall, stopping outside her door. She was crying out in her sleep now. Words tumbled and frantic. He raised his hand to knock, to wake her from whatever nightmare had its claws in her, when he heard it clear as a bell. "Coulter! Please! Coulter!" His blood turned to ice water. She was calling his name. This woman he'd just met, who'd been in his house for mere hours, was crying out for him in her sleep like her life depended on it. He backed away slowly, his mind reeling. Coincidence. It had to be. Maybe she was just dreaming about their meeting, her mind trying to process the strangeness of it all. But as he lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at work here. The dream from nights before echoed in his memory, a woman's voice calling his name through the mist, urgent and afraid. In her room, Isabel Winters clutched her thin pillow and wept silently, unaware that her secrets were already beginning to spill into the desert night. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and rust as Coulter emerged from his room. He'd barely slept, haunted by the sound of his name on Isabel's lips, moving quietly to avoid waking her. He started the coffee and stepped onto the porch to watch the sunrise. When he heard movement inside, he steeled himself. But the woman who appeared in the kitchen doorway looked composed, her dark hair pinned neatly, wearing a simple blue calico dress. Only the faint circles under her eyes betrayed her restless night. "Good morning," she said softly, not quite meeting his gaze. "Coffee's ready." He poured 2 cups, noting how she waited until he'd moved away from the stove before approaching. They stood at opposite ends of the kitchen, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. Finally, she spoke. "I apologize if I disturbed your sleep. I sometimes have difficult dreams." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "We all got our demons, Miss Winters. Isabel," she corrected quietly. "If we're to be, that is, I think we should use given names." "Fair enough." She set down her cup with trembling hands. "I'd like to earn my keep. Tell me what needs doing. This ain't a working arrangement. You came here as a bride." Color flooded her cheeks. "Yes, but surely we should become acquainted first. Let me help with the household duties at least." Something in her voice, the desperate need to be useful, to have purpose, struck a chord in him. He recognized that feeling, the way work could keep the darkness at bay. "Can you handle a kitchen garden in this heat?" Her eyes lit up, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her. "I can try." He showed her the failed garden plot behind the house, where Sarah had once coaxed tomatoes and beans from the unforgiving soil. The fence had fallen in places. Tumbleweeds collected in the corners. "Haven't touched it in years," he admitted. "Ground's hard as stone. All ground can be worked," Isabel said, kneeling to sift the dirt through her fingers. "It just needs patience." Over the following days, they settled into a careful routine. Coulter would rise before dawn, tend the horses and check the water barrels. By the time he returned, Isabel would have breakfast waiting. Nothing fancy, but properly cooked and served on the china plates he'd forgotten he owned. She attacked the garden with surprising determination, clearing weeds, mending the fence, hauling bucket after bucket of water from the well. He caught himself watching from the barn as she worked, sweat soaking through her dress, dirt smudging her cheeks. There was something fierce in her concentration, as if she were fighting the earth itself. In the evenings, they ate together in continued silence. Sometimes he'd catch her stealing glances at him, questions burning in her eyes that she never voiced. Other times, she'd stare out the window at the endless desert, lost in thoughts he couldn't fathom. A week passed this way. Then came the storm. Coulter felt it building all day, the pressure dropping, the horses restless in their stalls. By late afternoon, black clouds massed over the mountains, lightning flickering in their depths. "Storm coming," he told Isabel at supper. "Sometimes they're just wind and noise, but sometimes..." Thunder crashed overhead, making her jump. The first fat raindrops splattered against the windows. "I need to secure the barn doors," he said, grabbing his hat. "I'll help." "No, stay inside." But the wind hit with sudden fury, rattling the walls. Through the window, he saw the barn door fly open, banging wildly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating sheets of rain. He plunged into the storm, instantly soaked. The wind tried to tear him sideways as he fought toward the barn. Thunder exploded directly overhead, the sound feeling like it could split the earth. He was wrestling with the door when he heard her scream his name. Turning, he saw Isabel running toward him through the downpour, her dress plastered to her body. Lightning struck nearby, too close, the flash blinding white. She slipped in the mud, going down hard. Without thinking, he abandoned the door and ran to her, pulling her up into his arms. She clung to him, trembling violently, rain streaming down both their faces. "Damn fool woman," he shouted over the storm. "I told you to stay inside," but she was sobbing against his chest, fingers twisted in his shirt, and suddenly he was holding her properly, shielding her with his body as they stumbled back to the house. They burst through the door, dripping and gasping. In the lamplight, he could see her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a pattern of old scars that made his jaw clench. "You're hurt," he said. "No, I'm..." She followed his gaze and quickly pulled the fabric up, but not before he'd seen enough. "Get changed before you catch your death. I'll stoke the fire." She disappeared into her room while he built up the flames in the fireplace. When she emerged, wrapped in a shawl over a dry dress. He'd already changed into dry clothes himself. They stood before the fire, steam rising from their hair. "The barn door?" she asked. "It'll keep till morning." The storm raged outside, but inside, the crackling fire created a bubble of warmth. She sat on the floor near the hearth, arms wrapped around her knees. He took the chair, trying not to notice how the firelight caught in her damp hair. "You didn't have to come after me," she said quietly. "You didn't have to come help. I heard the door banging. I was afraid something would happen to you." The admission hung between them. He didn't know what to say to that. This woman who barely knew him, fearing for his safety. She shifted, wincing, and without thinking he asked, "Who hurt you?" Her whole body went rigid. "I don't know what you mean. The scars, those aren't from any accident." For a long moment, only the fire spoke. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. "Does it matter? It's in the past. Everything's in the past until it shows up at your door." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw depths of pain that matched his own. "Is that experience talking? Maybe." She reached out, fingertips barely grazing the scar on his face. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Who hurt you?" she asked, echoing his question. "Life, war, loss." He caught her hand, meaning to push it away, but somehow ended up holding it instead. Her fingers were cold despite the fire. "I dream about you," she whispered suddenly, then looked horrified at the admission. His grip tightened. "I know. I heard you calling my name that first night. No, I mean, before. For months before I came here. A rider in the mist. Someone coming to..." She pulled her hand free, wrapping her arms around herself. "You'll think me mad. Try me." But she shook her head, retreating into herself. "I should go to bed. Thank you for coming after me." She rose, but swayed slightly. Without thinking, he steadied her, hands on her shoulders. They stood frozen that way, faces inches apart, the fire casting dancing shadows. Her lips parted slightly, eyes wide and dark. He could kiss her. The thought came unbidden and unwanted. Could lean down and taste whatever secrets she kept behind those careful smiles. But that way lay madness. He'd learned that lesson too well. Instead, he stepped back, letting his hands fall. Something like disappointment flickered across her face before she smoothed it away. "Good night, Coulter. Good night." After she left, he sat by the dying fire nursing a whiskey. The storm had passed, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the eaves. In the morning, there'd be damage to assess, repairs to make, but all he could think about was the moment when she'd touched his scar, the weight of her hand in his, the way she'd felt in his arms during the storm. He'd built his life around keeping people out. The ranch was his fortress, his solitude a shield against further hurt. But this woman, this stranger who called his name in her sleep, was already inside his walls. And the terrible truth was, part of him didn't want to force her out. In her room, Isabel lay awake listening to his footsteps on the floorboards. She pressed her fingers to her lips, imagining what might have happened if he hadn't stepped away. The thought frightened her almost as much as it thrilled her. She'd run so far to escape one man's possession, only to find herself dreaming of another's touch. But Coulter's hands had been gentle when he steadied her, his eyes holding pain instead of cruelty. Maybe that was why she dreamed of him even before knowing his face, some deep part of her recognizing a kindred wounded soul. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm moving on to trouble other lands. She closed her eyes and for once didn't dream at all, as if the night's strange intimacy had temporarily quieted whatever forces haunted her sleep. But outside, Coulter sat guard on the porch until dawn, watching the desert and fighting the urge to stand sentinel at her door. Some instinct, honed by years of war and loss, whispered that their fragile peace wouldn't last. The storm had been just the beginning. The truth came out piece by piece, like water seeping through cracked earth. It started 3 weeks after the storm, on a morning when Coulter found Isabel sitting in her garden, staring at nothing. The beans she'd coaxed from the soil were beginning to flower, but she looked through them as if seeing something else entirely. "You all right?" he asked, though he'd learned she'd never answer directly. She startled, then gave him that practiced smile. "Just thinking about whether the past ever really lets us go." He crouched beside her, noting how she still shifted away from sudden movements. "In my experience, it doesn't. We just learn to carry it better." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I was married before." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Coulter kept his face neutral, though something cold settled in his gut. "His name was Thorne, Marcus Thorne. He owns half of Cincinnati, or near enough." She pulled a weed with unnecessary force. "I was 17 when my father arranged the match. Thorne was 43, wealthy, well-connected. Father owed him money." Coulter's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. "At first, he was charming. Gifts, flowers, promises of a grand life. I was young enough to believe it." Her voice went flat, emotionless. "The charm lasted exactly until our wedding night. After that," she touched her shoulder unconsciously, where he'd seen the scars. "How long?" he asked quietly. 8 years. 8 years of being his possession, his pretty bird in a gilded cage. He was careful. You see, never marked where it would show in public. And who would believe me anyway? Marcus Thorne, pillar of society. What changed?" She met his eyes then, and he saw steel beneath the softness. "I got pregnant, and he didn't want a child. Said it would ruin my figure, make me less pleasing. He made sure I lost it." Coulter's hands clenched into fists. She noticed and almost smiled. "That's when I knew I had to run. A maid helped me. She'd seen too much, felt guilty. We sent letters to the matrimonial agencies in secret. When your response came..." She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "Your letter was different. Honest about the hardships. No false promises. You sounded like someone who understood loss. So you ran. In the middle of the night, with only what I could carry. Took trains to Kansas. Then the stage here. I've been terrified every day that he'd find me." They sat in silence while the desert wind whispered through the bean plants. Finally, Coulter spoke. "The name Thorne. Marcus Thorne. You sure?" Something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "You know him?" "Know of him." Coulter's voice had gone dangerously quiet. He had contracts with the army during the war. Supplied beef that was half rotten, blankets that fell apart in the rain. When my unit complained. When we tried to refuse the shipments. He touched his scarred face. Let's just say Thorne had friends in high places. My whole unit was sent on a suicide mission as punishment. I was the only one who made it back. Isabel's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God. Coulter, I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "Not your fault." But his mind was racing. Of all the men in the world, she'd been married to Thorne, the same bastard whose greed had killed his brothers in arms. It felt like fate. Or maybe just the devil's own joke. "I'll leave," she said suddenly. "I'll go further west. California, maybe. I won't bring his evil to your door." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. She flinched, and he gentled his voice. "No. You're not running anymore. Man wants to come for you. He'll find me waiting. You don't understand. He has money, connections. He could hire a dozen guns." I said no. He stood, decision crystallizing. "You're under my protection now. That means something out here." She rose too, swaying slightly. He steadied her without thinking. And suddenly they were standing close, her hands pressed against his chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk—" "Because I couldn't protect them before. My wife, my daughter. Because I've been dead inside for 3 years. And you—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Your name," she said wonderingly. "That's why I dreamed your name. Somehow I knew, before we ever met, that you were the one who could—" He silenced her the only way he knew how, covering her mouth with his. The kiss was careful at first, testing, but when she made a soft sound and pressed closer, something broke loose in him. His arms came around her, pulling her against him, and her hands tangled in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she touched his face with trembling fingers. "I'm frightened. Of me. Of wanting this, of believing I could have something good." He understood that fear, lived with it every day. Instead of answering, he kissed her again. Slower this time, trying to tell her with actions what he couldn't say in words, that she was safe, that he'd stand between her and any harm, that maybe, impossibly, they could heal each other. But even as she melted against him, even as hope unfurled in his chest for the first time in years, he couldn't shake the feeling that their pasts were racing toward them like a desert storm. That night, she came to his room. He woke to find her silhouette in the doorway, wrapped in only a thin nightgown. "Isabel? I can't sleep. The dreams." She hugged herself. "May I stay? Just to sleep. I feel safer with you." Wordlessly, he lifted the blanket. She slid in beside him, keeping careful distance at first, but as the night deepened, she curved into his warmth, her back pressed to his chest. He held himself rigid, achingly aware of her softness, the scent of her hair. "Sarah," she said quietly in the darkness. "Your wife. Tell me about her." So he did, surprising himself. Told her about the laughing girl he'd married at 19, the daughter born a year later. How they'd built a little farm in Texas, planning a big family. How he'd enlisted to earn extra money, leaving them safe, he'd thought, with her parents. "Raiders hit while I was gone, Comancheros, looking for horses and whatever else they could take. The house was burned when I got back. Found them in the root cellar where they'd tried to hide." Isabel turned in his arms, touching his face in the darkness. "How do you bear it?" "Some days I don't. Some days I come close to eating my gun. But then the sun comes up anyway. And there's work to do, and—" He paused. "And now there's you." She kissed him then, salt tears on both their faces, and what followed was slow and careful and achingly tender. Two damaged souls finding solace in each other's arms, sharing warmth against the cold desert night. Afterwards, she traced the scars on his chest, knife wounds, bullet holes, the map of a violent life. "We're both marked," she whispered. "Survivors usually are." She fell asleep curled against him, one hand fisted in his shirt as if afraid he'd disappear. He stayed awake, watching the stars wheel outside the window and fighting the urge to saddle up and ride for Cincinnati, to find Marcus Thorne and put a bullet between his eyes for every mark on Isabel's skin. But that would mean leaving her alone, and he'd learned the hard way what happened when he left the people he loved unprotected. So he held her instead and made plans. If Thorne came, when he came, Coulter would be ready, in her sleep. Isabel murmured his name again, but this time it sounded like a prayer answered instead of a plea for help. He pressed his lips to her hair and allowed himself, for just a moment, to believe they might have found something worth fighting for. Dawn came too soon, painting the room in shades of gold and shadow. Isabel woke slowly, blinking up at him with wonder, as if surprised to find the night hadn't been a dream. "Morning," he said roughly. She smiled, shy and sweet. "Morning." They might have stayed there, suspended in that perfect moment, but the sound of horses approaching shattered the peace. Multiple horses riding hard. Coulter was out of bed in an instant, pulling on pants and reaching for his gun. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "Coulter, I mean it. Isabel, lock the door." He grabbed his rifle and slipped out, every nerve singing with tension. Through the window, he could see 3 riders approaching, dust clouds rising behind them. His finger found the trigger. Ready. But as they drew closer, he recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Ben Morrison from Mercy's Bend, his tin star glinting in the morning sun. Coulter lowered the rifle but didn't put it away. "Coulter," the sheriff called, reining up at a safe distance. "Need a word. State your business." "Ben." The sheriff dismounted slowly, hands visible. "Got a wire from Cincinnati yesterday. Man named Thorne, looking for his runaway wife. Says she might have headed this way." Coulter's expression gave nothing away. "That's so? Described her pretty well. Dark hair, green eyes, about 26 years old. Goes by Isabel." Ben's eyes flicked to the house. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Man loses his wife, that's his problem." "Now, Coulter, you know it ain't that simple. Thorne's offering $1,000 for information. That's a lot of money. Enough to make folks remember things they might otherwise forget. Like I said, his problem." Ben sighed. "I'm trying to help you here." "Thorne's got influence. Even out here, he's already hired guns. Pinkerton men. They'll come looking, and when they do, they'll find a man defending his home. That's still legal. Last I checked." "Damn it, Coulter!" Ben's composure cracked. "I know what you're thinking, but you can't fight the whole world. If the woman's here, if she really is his legal wife, she's under my protection." Coulter's voice was flat, final. "Anyone wants to dispute that, they know where to find me." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "You sure this is the hill you want to die on? I've died on worse hills for worse reasons. Now get off my land." Ben remounted, shaking his head. "I'll do what I can to buy you time. But Coulter, they're coming. Be ready." After they left, Coulter found Isabel dressed and armed with a kitchen knife, face pale but determined. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." She set the knife down with shaking hands. "I should go." "I've brought disaster to your door, just like I feared." He pulled her against him, cutting off her words. "You're not going anywhere. We'll face this together. You don't have to—" "Yes," he said fiercely. "I do. For the first time in 3 years, I have something worth protecting. I'll be damned if I let him take you back." She was crying now, silently, tears soaking his shirt. He held her until the storm passed, then set about preparing for war, because war was coming, whether they were ready or not. But as he taught her to shoot that afternoon, as they worked side by side fortifying the ranch, He felt more alive than he had since burying his family. Maybe that's what love was in a hard land. Not just the tender moments, but the willingness to stand and fight for them. The desert sun beat down mercilessly. And somewhere beyond the horizon, riders were coming. But for now, for this moment, they were together. And that, Coulter thought as he watched Isabel sight down the rifle barrel with grim determination, was worth any price they might have to pay. The days that followed took on a strange dual quality, tense with waiting for the storm to break, yet filled with an unexpected sweetness. Coulter taught Isabel to shoot properly, standing behind her to correct her stance, his hands covering hers on the rifle stock. She learned quickly, driven by grim necessity, but in the spaces between lessons, they found moments of lightness. "You're pulling to the right," he murmured against her ear as she aimed at a row of bottles. "Breathe out slowly. Squeeze, don't jerk." The bottle exploded in a shower of glass. She turned in his arms, grinning. "I did it." "That you did." He couldn't help but smile back, struck by how young she looked when joy lit her face. "Few more weeks of practice, you'll be out shooting me." Liar. But she kissed him anyway, quick and sweet in the afternoon sun. They developed routines that felt almost normal. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mesas gold. Afternoons working, she in her flourishing garden, he mending fences and reinforcing defensive positions. Evenings by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from his small collection of books, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. At night, she came to his bed without question now. They made love with increasing passion as the initial tentativeness faded. He learned the map of her body, which touches made her gasp, which made her arch against him with abandon. She discovered he was ticklish behind his left knee, that kissing the scar on his shoulder made him groan. One evening, a week after the sheriff's visit, they sat outside watching the stars emerge. Isabel had made a surprisingly good rabbit stew, and Coulter was pleasantly full, almost content. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly, "for taking me in, for believing me." "Nothing to thank me for." "There is." She turned to face him. "You gave me back myself. With Marcus, I'd forgotten who I was beneath the fear. But here, with you." She gestured at the vast desert. "I remember." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You gave me something too, reason to keep going." "Just one reason?" she teased. "Well, your biscuits are improving. That's 2 reasons." She swatted his arm, laughing. The sound echoed across the empty land, and for a moment, it was easy to forget danger was coming. But the next morning, Tom Brennan rode in from the neighboring ranch with news. "Strangers in town," he told Coulter. 3 of them, asking questions. City men, wearing tied-down guns. Coulter's face hardened. "When?" "Yesterday. They're staying at the hotel. Flash enough money around. One of them cornered Widow Martinez, asked if she'd seen a woman matching your Isabel's description." "What did she say?" Tom grinned. "Told them she'd seen lots of women and minded her own business about all of them. But Coulter, they'll find someone who talks eventually. Money loosens tongues." After Tom left, Coulter found Isabel in the garden, attacking weeds with vicious determination. "You heard?" "Yes." She didn't look up. "It's starting." That night, she clung to him with desperate passion, as if trying to memorize the feel of him. "If something happens, nothing's going to happen. Listen to me." She rose up on her elbow, hair falling like a curtain around them. "If something happens, I want you to know, these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Whatever comes, it was worth it." He pulled her down for a fierce kiss. "Nothing will happen. I won't let him have you." But the next day brought worse news. The strangers had been joined by 2 more, and they'd hired local guides. They were searching the outlying ranches systematically. Coulter made his decision. "We're going on the offensive. Better to meet trouble standing than wait for it to come knocking." He rode out before dawn, leaving Isabel with strict instructions to bar the door and shoot anyone she didn't recognize. In town, he made his presence known, stopping at the saloon, the general store, making sure the strangers heard his name. He didn't have long to wait. As he emerged from the barber shop, freshly shaved, wanting to look his best for whatever came, two men bracketed him on the boardwalk. Coulter Hayes. The speaker was lean, well-dressed, with the cold eyes of a professional killer. Who's asking? Name's Randall. I work for Mr. Marcus Thorne. He's looking for his wife. Can't help you. Sure about that. Mr. Thorne's offering a generous reward, $5,000 for her safe return. Like I said, can't help you. Randall smiled thinly. See, thing is, we already know she's at your place. The stage driver remembered her, remembered you picking her up. Now, we can do this easy or hard. Hard, then. Coulter's hand hovered near his gun. Tell Thorne if he wants her. He can come himself. Otherwise, get out of my town. The second man spoke up. You threatening us? Stating facts. You boys are about to have a real unfortunate accident if you don't mount up and ride out. Sheriff's particular about keeping the peace. As if on cue, Sheriff Morrison emerged from his office, scattergun prominent. Problem here, gentlemen. No problem, Randall said smoothly. Just having a friendly conversation. Conversation's over, Ben said. You boys best move along. They left, but Coulter caught Randall's parting look, a promise that this wasn't finished. He rode hard for home, pushing his horse to its limits. As the ranch came into view, everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. His neck prickled with combat instinct. The front door stood open. Coulter dismounted running, gun drawn. Isabel! He found her in the bedroom, tied to a chair, gagged but apparently unharmed. Her eyes went wide with relief when she saw him. As he cut her bonds, she gasped out. They're still here! Trap! The cold barrel of a gun pressed against his neck. Drop it. Hayes. Coulter let his Colt fall, mind racing. The man behind him chuckled. Should have taken the money. Now Mr. Thorne gets his wife back, and you get a shallow grave. That's my wife you're talking about. Coulter kept his voice steady. We were married last week. Check the church records. Momentary hesitation. Doesn't matter. Mr. Thorne has prior claim. Isabel moved like lightning, snatching the fallen Colt and firing in one motion. The man behind Coulter screamed, clutching his shoulder. Coulter spun, grabbed the wounded man's gun, and they heard boots pounding on the porch. Back room, he hissed, pushing Isabel behind him. What followed was chaos, gunfire, shouts, the crash of furniture. Coulter fought with cold precision, using every dirty trick learned in war. Isabel proved her practice had paid off, picking off one attacker through the window. When the smoke cleared, two men lay dead, one wounded, and one had fled. Coulter bled from a graze on his ribs, but Isabel was untouched. You saved my life, he said, pulling her against him. You saved mine first. She was shaking but fierce. Is it over? He looked at the bodies, at the blood soaking into his floor. No, this was just the beginning. Thorne will send more. Then we'll be ready. She reloaded the Colt with steady hands. I'm done running. Coulter, this is my home now. Our home. That night, they dragged the bodies away from the house and burned them in the desert. It was grim work, but necessary. As the flames rose against the star-filled sky, Coulter made a decision. We're getting married, real married, with papers and witnesses, tomorrow. Coulter, no arguments. It'll give us legal standing, make it harder for him to claim you. Plus, he pulled her close, I want it official. Want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. She kissed him hard, tasting of smoke and determination. Yes, though I should warn you, I'm a terrible wife. Ask my first husband. I'll take my chances. They made love that night with desperate intensity, aware that each time might be the last. But when morning came, they rose together, ready to face whatever came next. The war had begun, but they'd won the first battle. And as they rode toward town and the preacher, Coulter felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was temporary. But it was theirs, behind them. Smoke still rose from the desert, carrying ash and secrets into the endless sky. Ahead waited either death or a future together. Coulter spurred his horse faster, Isabel keeping pace beside him, and chose to believe in the future. The wedding was simple. A few words spoken in the dusty church. Sheriff Morrison and his wife as witnesses. Reverend Meyer's blessing pronounced over their joined hands. Isabel wore her blue calico, Coulter his cleanest shirt, when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife. Coulter kissed her with a fierceness that made Mrs. Morrison fan herself. That should complicate Thorne's claims, Ben said afterward, handing Coulter the signed certificate. Though a determined man with deep pockets, let me worry about that, Coulter replied, tucking the paper inside his vest. You've done enough, Ben. The sheriff studied him. This isn't over. I know. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, legally bound now, in addition to the bonds they'd already forged. Isabel held his hand as they rode, their horses walking close together. Mrs. Hayes, he said, testing the words. Mr. Hayes, she replied, and her smile was radiant despite everything. For 3 days, they had peace. 3 days of working side by side, of stolen kisses between chores, of nights spent mapping each other's desires with increasing boldness. Isabel proved to have a wicked sense of humor when she felt safe, teasing him about his cooking, his stubbornness, the way he scowled at her vegetable garden's success. On the 4th day, Coulter noticed the watchers. They were good. He'd give them that, staying well back, using the terrain, switching positions. But he'd spent too many years staying alive by paranoia to miss the signs. Sun glinting off glass, dust where no wind blew, the way the desert birds fell silent in certain directions. We're being watched, he told Isabel that evening, keeping his voice casual as they sat on the porch. Her hand tightened on her coffee cup, but otherwise she showed no reaction. How many? At least 3 positions, maybe more. What do? We wait. Let them think we don't know. When they move, we'll be ready. That night, he showed her the hidden weapons he'd cached around the property. A rifle in the barn rafters, ammunition buried beneath the water trough, a scattergun hidden in the outhouse. She absorbed it all with grim determination. I need to tell you something, she said as they lay in bed, moonlight streaming through the window. About the baby I lost. He pulled her closer, waiting. I wanted that child so much. Even though I knew Marcus would make its life hell, I wanted something that was mine, something that came from love, even if... She paused. Even if the act that created it wasn't loving. Isabel, let me finish. After I lost it, I thought I'd never want that again. The pain was too much, but now... She took his hand, placed it on her flat stomach. If it happened again with you, I'd want it, just so you know. He kissed her temple, throat too tight for words. The thought of her carrying his child, of building the family stolen from him, was almost too much hope to bear. Though Lord knows this is terrible timing to be thinking of such things. She added with a shaky laugh, when is it ever good timing in lives like ours? The attack came at dawn 2 days later. Coulter woke to the sound of horses. Too many horses. He rolled out of bed, grabbing his gun belt. Up, now! They're coming! Isabel was already moving, pulling on clothes with practiced efficiency. They'd drilled this. She would take position at the east window with the rifle while he covered the front. The first shots shattered the morning quiet, splinters flying as bullets punched through the walls. Coulter returned fire, picking his targets carefully. He counted muzzle flashes. 5, maybe 6 shooters. How you doing back there? He called to Isabel. Fine. Her rifle cracked steadily. Got one pinned behind the water trough. Despite everything, he felt a surge of pride. His wife was magnificent. The attackers tried to rush the house. Coulter dropped 2 with his rifle before they made it halfway. Isabel's shooting drove another back, but there were too many, and they were spreading out, trying to flank. Coulter! Isabel's scream sent ice through his veins. He turned to see a man coming through the back window, gun raised. Without thinking, Coulter threw his knife. It caught the intruder in the throat, dropping him in a gurgling heap. But the distraction cost him. Pain exploded through his side as a bullet found its mark. He stumbled, cursing, pressing his hand to the wound. "You're hit!" Isabel started toward him. "Stay at your post," he gritted out, returning to the window. Blood soaked his shirt, but he'd had worse. "Keep shooting." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Gradually, the incoming fire slackened. Coulter counted 2 more bodies in the yard, saw another man limping away, supported by a companion. Then, sudden silence. "That all of them?" Isabel whispered. "Don't know. Stay ready." They waited, weapons trained on the yard. Finally, a voice called out. Refined, educated, terrifyingly familiar to Isabel. "Mrs. Thorne, or should I say, Mrs. Hayes, this is your husband, your real husband." Isabel went rigid. Coulter tried to move to her, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The blood loss was worse than he'd thought. "I know you're in there, my dear," Marcus Thorne continued. "And apparently you found yourself a savage to rut with. No matter. I'm a forgiving man. Come out now, and I'll spare his life." "Go to hell," Isabel shouted back. "Such language. This frontier has coarsened you. Darling, no matter. I'll soon have you back where you belong." Coulter slumped against the wall, trying to staunch the bleeding. Isabel crawled to him, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind the wound. "How bad?" she asked. "I'll live." Maybe. The edges of his vision were going gray. "I'm coming out," she called suddenly. "No!" Coulter grabbed for her, but she evaded him. "I won't let you die for me," she said fiercely. "I won't be the cause of another good man's death." "Isabel, don't—" But she was already moving to the door. "I'm coming out. Don't shoot." She stepped onto the porch, hands raised, through the window. Coulter could see Thorne, older than he'd expected. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed even after a gunfight. The man's cold smile made Coulter's blood boil. "There's my darling girl," Thorne said. "Come here." Isabel took a step forward. Another. She was almost to Thorne when she struck, pulling the hidden derringer from her sleeve and firing point blank. The small gun cracked. Thorne staggered, clutching his chest, face a mask of shock. But the derringer held only 1 shot, and Thorne's remaining men raised their weapons. Coulter found strength he didn't know he had. Bursting through the door, he put himself between Isabel and the guns, his Colt blazing. 1 man fell, another, but there were too many, and he was too weak. Thunder split the air. Not gunfire, hoofbeats. Sheriff Morrison and a posse came charging over the ridge, guns drawn. The remaining attackers threw down their weapons, suddenly outnumbered. Coulter collapsed to his knees, Isabel catching him. Through dimming vision, he saw Thorne on the ground, blood spreading across his fancy shirt. "Did I—" Isabel's voice shook. "You did perfect," Coulter managed. "Perfect shot." Thorne was trying to speak, reaching for Isabel. She looked down at him with ice in her eyes. "You took everything from me, my innocence, my child, my hope. But you couldn't take my spirit, and now you've got nothing." The man who'd terrorized her for years died with her rejection in his ears. "Easy there," Ben Morrison said, kneeling beside Coulter. "Doc's on his way. You just hold on." But Coulter was looking at Isabel, at her fierce, beautiful face. "Worth it?" he whispered. "You're worth it." "Don't you dare die on me," she said fiercely. "You hear me, Coulter Hayes? I forbid it." He tried to smile. "Yes, ma'am." The world faded to black, but he could still feel her hands holding his, still hear her voice calling him back from the darkness. And he thought, as consciousness slipped away, that if this was how he died, defending the woman he loved, the woman who'd brought him back to life, well, there were worse ways to go. But Isabel's will was stronger than death, and she wasn't done with him yet. So he held on, following her voice like a beacon through the dark, because he'd promised to protect her. And Coulter Hayes always kept his promises, even if it meant defying death itself. Coulter drifted in and out of consciousness for 3 days. Sometimes he heard Doc Mitchell's gruff voice, sometimes Sheriff Morrison's, but always Isabel was there. Her voice anchored him when the fever tried to drag him under. Her cool hands soothed when the pain became unbearable. "Stubborn fool," she whispered once when she thought he was sleeping. "Living through war and raiders and Lord knows what else, only to nearly die protecting me." He wanted to tell her she was worth dying for, but his throat wouldn't work, so he squeezed her hand instead, weak but deliberate. "Coulter," hope blazed in her voice. "Doc, he's awake!" The old doctor peered down at him, checking the bandages. "About time. Your wife's been wearing holes in my floor with her pacing. How?" Coulter's voice came out a rasp. "How long?" 3 days, Isabel said, gripping his hand. "The bullet went deep. Nicked something important. Doc had to dig it out." Thorne. "Dead. Very dead." Satisfaction colored her tone. "Along with 5 of his hired guns. The rest are in jail, likely to hang." "Good." She helped him sip water, her movements infinitely gentle. In the lamplight, he could see she hadn't been sleeping. Dark circles under her eyes, hair hastily pinned. "You need rest," he managed. "So do you. Yet here we are talking." But she smiled, the first real smile he'd seen since the attack. Recovery was slow. The wound had indeed nicked something important. Doc Mitchell used fancy medical words, but the upshot was Coulter had come within a hair's breadth of bleeding out. For 2 weeks, he could barely sit up without the room spinning. Isabel threw herself into nursing him with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. She made broth when he could barely eat, changed his bandages with steady hands, read to him from his small collection of books when the boredom grew unbearable. "You'd make a fine nurse," he told her one afternoon as she helped him to the porch for fresh air. "I had a good teacher." Her face darkened briefly. "One of Marcus's servants showed me how to tend wounds. She'd had plenty of practice." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the desert shimmer in the heat. The ranch showed signs of the battle. Bullet holes in the walls, dark stains in the dirt, but Isabel had already started repairs. "Been thinking," Coulter said eventually, "about what you said, about children." She stilled beside him. "Oh? This is no life for a child. Violence, isolation." "Coulter Hayes, if you're about to suggest I leave for my own good—" "No?" He caught her hand. "Never. Just thinking maybe we could build something better. Sell this place. Start fresh somewhere. California, maybe, like you said, somewhere Thorne's shadow can't reach." She studied him. "You'd leave? This ranch was your fortress." Now it's just a house." He pulled her closer. "Home is wherever you are." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You romantic fool. Don't let that get around. Got a reputation to maintain." She laughed through her tears and kissed him carefully, mindful of his injuries. But careful wasn't what he wanted anymore. He deepened the kiss, pulling her onto his lap despite the twinge in his side. "Coulter, you'll hurt yourself." "Worth it." He nuzzled her neck, gratified by her shiver. "Been weeks. Isabel, man's got needs. The doctor said no strenuous activity for a month. Good thing you'll be doing all the work then." "Coulter." But she was laughing, and when he kissed her again, she melted against him. They made love that night for the first time since the attack, Isabel taking exquisite care not to strain his wound. It was slow and tender, a reaffirmation of life after dancing so close to death. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to coyotes sing to the moon. "I want to go back," she said suddenly. "To Cincinnati." Coulter tensed. "Why?" "There are accounts. Money Marcus hid from me. Property in my name he couldn't touch. Legal things that need settling. And—" She paused. "I need to see his grave. Need to know he's really gone." "Then we'll go." You're in no condition to travel. I will be. Give me another week. She propped herself on an elbow, studying his face. You do that. Go back to civilization for me. I'd walk through hell for you. Cincinnati's only slightly worse. 2 weeks later, they prepared for the journey. Coulter had regained most of his strength, though the wound still pulled when he moved too quickly. They decided to travel by train as far as possible, faster and easier than horseback. The night before leaving, they stood on the porch watching the stars. The ranch looked peaceful in the darkness. No sign of the violence that had erupted here. Will you miss it? Isabel asked. Some. It kept me alive when I thought I had nothing left to live for. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. But that's done now. Time to live for something better. They made one stop before catching the train. The cemetery where Sarah and Emma lay. Coulter hadn't visited since burying them. Couldn't bear it. But now, with Isabel's hand in his, he found the strength. Tell me about them, Isabel said softly as they stood before the simple headstones. So he did. Told her about Sarah's laugh, Emma's first steps, the dreams they'd shared. When his voice broke, Isabel held him, offering the comfort of her presence. They'd have liked you, he said finally. Sarah always said I needed someone to keep me from brooding. I'll do my best. She knelt, placing wildflowers on each grave. I'll take care of him, she whispered. I promise. As they walked back to the wagon, Coulter felt something shift inside him. Not forgetting, never that, but finally, truly letting go. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer owned him. The train station in Albuquerque was chaos. People, noise, the shriek of steam engines. Coulter instinctively positioned himself between Isabel and the crowd, hand near his gun. Easy, she murmured. No one's hunting us anymore. But old habits died hard. He remained vigilant as they boarded, found their compartment, settled in for the long journey east. Only when the train pulled out, leaving the desert behind, did he finally relax. Strange, Isabel said, watching the landscape blur past. I ran so hard from that life, and now I'm choosing to return. Different this time. You're not alone. She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. No, not alone. They made love in the swaying compartment that night, muffling their sounds against each other's skin. It felt illicit, exciting, a far cry from their isolated ranch. Afterward, they lay tangled in the narrow berth, listening to the rhythm of the rails. What will we do after? Isabel asked. After Cincinnati? Whatever you want. California, Oregon. Hell, we could go to Paris if you've a mind. You in Paris? She giggled. Can you imagine? I can learn. For you, I can learn anything. She was quiet for a moment. I love you, she said simply. I should have said it before, during the attack, but I was so frightened. He silenced her with a kiss. I know. Knew it when you stepped out to face Thorne, when you stayed through my recovery. He paused, the words still foreign after so long. I love you too. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of changing landscapes and stolen moments. They talked, planned, dreamed. Isabel spoke of the life she wanted. A real home, not a fortress. Children laughing in the yard. Peace. And you? She asked. What do you want? You safe, you happy, everything else is gravy. That's not an answer. He considered. I want to build things instead of destroying them. Want to wake up without checking for threats. Want... He paused, almost embarrassed. Want to see you in a real wedding dress. Do it proper this time. Coulter Hayes, are you proposing? We're already married. Worth doing twice if we do it right. She kissed him until they were both breathless. Yes, to all of it. Yes. Cincinnati loomed ahead. Isabel's past waiting to be confronted and conquered. But together, Coulter thought, they could face anything. They'd already survived the worst. Violence, betrayal, the shadows of their histories. Now it was time to step into the light. The train carried them east through the night, toward whatever future they chose to build. and for the first time in longer than he could remember. Coulter Hayes looked forward to tomorrow. Cincinnati rose from the Ohio River like a sprawling beast of brick and smoke. Coulter felt his shoulders tense as their carriage rolled through streets choked with people, horses, and the clatter of industry. After the vast silence of the desert, the city felt like being slowly suffocated. "Easy," Isabel murmured, taking his hand. "I know it's overwhelming." "How did you stand it?" he asked, watching the press of humanity outside their window. I survived it." Her fingers tightened on his. "The Thorne mansion is in Clifton Heights. We'll need to see his lawyers first, establish my claims." They'd taken rooms at a modest hotel downtown, avoiding the grand establishments where Isabel might be recognized. She'd been quietly terrified during the journey, but now, dressed in a new traveling suit they'd bought in Kansas City, she looked every inch the society lady she'd once been. "You sure about this?" Coulter asked as they prepared to visit the law offices. "No, but it needs doing." She adjusted his new coat. He'd protested the expense, but she'd insisted. "You look handsome, dangerous, still, but handsome. Feel like a trained bear in these clothes?" "My trained bear," she corrected, kissing his cheek. The law offices of Pemberton and Associates occupied a grand building on 4th Street. The clerk who greeted them looked at Coulter with barely concealed alarm until Isabel spoke. "Mrs. Isabel Hayes to see Mr. Pemberton. Tell him it concerns the Thorne estate." The change was immediate. Within minutes, they were ushered into a palatial office where an elderly man with magnificent whiskers rose to greet them. "Mrs. Thorne, we were informed of Mr. Thorne's unfortunate demise in the territories." "Mrs. Hayes," Isabel corrected coolly. "This is my husband, Coulter Hayes. I've come to settle my late first husband's affairs." Pemberton's eyes darted between them, clearly calculating. "Of course, please sit. The estate is complicated." What followed was an hour of legal language that made Coulter's head spin. The upshot seemed to be that Marcus Thorne, paranoid to the end, had hidden assets all over the city. Properties in Isabel's name he couldn't touch under Ohio law. Bank accounts in various institutions, investments in shipping and rail. The total value is considerable. Pemberton concluded, perhaps $300,000. Once everything is liquidated. Coulter nearly choked on his coffee. Isabel remained composed, though he saw her hands tremble slightly. "I want it all sold," she said firmly. "Every property, every investment, quickly and quietly. That could take months. Then you'd better start immediately." She stood, every inch the imperious society woman. "I'll return tomorrow for a full accounting. Good day, Mr. Pemberton." Outside, she sagged against Coulter. "God, I'd forgotten how exhausting it is, playing that role. 300,000, he said, still stunned. "Blood money." Her voice turned bitter. "Every penny paid for in bruises and tears, but we'll put it to better use than he ever did." They spent the afternoon visiting banks, Isabel reclaiming what was hers with a determination that both awed and worried Coulter. She was pushing herself hard, facing down clerks and managers who'd once bowed to her husband. That evening, back at the hotel, she finally broke. Coulter held her as she shook, overwhelmed by memories the city awakened. "We don't have to stay," he said. "Say the word and we're on the next train west." "No, I need to do this. All of it." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Tomorrow, I want to visit the house, see where he died." The Thorne mansion squatted on a hill overlooking the city, all Gothic towers and leering gargoyles. The gardens were already overgrown, the windows dark. A groundskeeper let them in, eyeing Isabel with recognition and fear. She walked through the rooms like a ghost, touching nothing. Coulter followed, hand near his gun, though the only enemies here were memories, in what had been her bedroom. She stood at the window overlooking the river. "I used to stand here for hours, dreaming of escape, imagining someone would come." She turned to him, And then you did. Took me long enough. Worth the wait. She moved to the bed, running her hand along the carved headboard. This is where I lost the baby. Where he... She stopped, jaw clenching. I want to burn it. The whole house. Might raise questions. I know. She sighed. But God, it would feel good to watch it all turn to ash. They left without looking back. But that night, Coulter woke to find her gone from their bed. He found her at the window, staring out at the gas-lit streets. Can't sleep. I keep thinking I hear him, his footsteps in the hall, his voice calling me. She shuddered. It's foolish. Not foolish. Natural. He pulled her back against his chest. But he's gone. Isabel, you put him in the ground yourself. He can't hurt you anymore. His lawyers can. His friends. They all knew what he was, and they did nothing. Now they smile and scrape because I have his money. But I see the judgment in their eyes. Then we finish this quick and leave them to their judgment. She turned in his arms. Make me forget. She whispered. Just for tonight? Make me forget all of it. He carried her back to bed and did his best to drive away the ghosts. They made love with desperate passion, her nails raking his back, his mouth swallowing her cries. Afterward, she slept deeply for the first time since arriving in the city. The next days blurred together, meetings with lawyers, visits to banks, papers signed in triplicate. Slowly, the empire Marcus Thorne had built was dismantled, converted to currency, and transferred to accounts in Isabel's name alone. On their last day, she had one final errand. The cemetery where Thorne was buried lay on the outskirts of the city, all solemn angels and polished granite. His tomb was obscenely grand, a marble monstrosity that dominated the landscape. Isabel stood before it for a long time, Coulter silent beside her. Finally, she spoke, voice carrying clearly in the still air. You thought you owned me, thought you'd broken me past fixing, but I survived you. I found love, real love, something you never understood. And now I'm taking everything you hoarded and using it to build a life filled with all the things you tried to deny me. Joy, freedom, children who'll never know your name. She turned to Coulter. I'm ready to go now. As they walked back to the carriage, she asked, Is it wrong that I feel nothing? No grief, no anger even, just empty. Means you're free. He said simply, Can't feel nothing for someone who has no hold on you anymore. That night, they took a sleeper car heading west. As the city lights faded behind them, Isabel curled against him, finally at peace. California? She asked sleepily. Wherever you want. We've got the means now. Someplace with mountains and the ocean. Someplace that doesn't know our names or our stories. We'll find it, he promised. Build that house you talked about. Raise those children. Children. She smiled against his chest. I like the sound of that, though Lord help them with you for a father. You'll have them shooting before they can walk, and you'll have them reading poetry and growing vegetables. A good combination. They fell silent, listening to the rails sing beneath them. Somewhere ahead lay their future, unknown but no longer frightening. They'd faced down their demons, buried their dead, reclaimed what was stolen. Now all that remained was to live. No more looking back. Isabel murmured as sleep took her. Only forward. Only forward. Coulter agreed, holding her close as the train carried them toward whatever tomorrow would bring. In Cincinnati, the Thorne mansion stood empty, waiting for new owners who'd never know the misery that had walked its halls. The lawyers counted their fees. The gossips found new scandals to whisper about. But Coulter and Isabel Hayes were already gone, riding the rails toward a future they'd write themselves, free at last from the shadows of the past. The train whistled lonely through the darkness, and they slept peacefully in each other's arms, no longer listening for footsteps that would never come again. The California coast stretched before them like a promise kept. After days of travel through mountains and valleys, the sight of the Pacific Ocean stole Isabel's breath. She pressed her face to the train window, eyes wide with wonder. It's so blue, she whispered, so endless. Coulter watched her joy with quiet satisfaction. They'd stopped in several towns along the way. Monterey, too busy. San Luis Obispo, too hot. But when they reached the small coastal settlement of Cambria, something clicked. "This one?" Isabel said as they walked the single main street. "Can you feel it?" He could. The town was small but thriving, perched between pine forests and dramatic cliffs. The air smelled of salt and possibility. Best of all, nobody looked twice at them. Just another couple seeking a fresh start in California. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a German widow named Mrs. Hoffman, who took one look at Isabel's wedding ring and Coulter's protective hovering and gave them her best room. "You looking to settle?" she asked over dinner. "Maybe," Coulter allowed. "Know of any land for sale?" "Old Peterson place, about 3 miles north. He's heading back east, wants to sell quick. Got a good house, some cleared land. Pretty spot, up on the bluff." They rode out the next morning. The property was everything Mrs. Hoffman promised, 40 acres of gentle slopes leading to cliffs that dropped to the ocean. The house was solid, 2 stories with a wraparound porch facing the sea, but it was the barn that caught Coulter's eye. "Room for horses," he said. "Could raise good stock here." "And there," Isabel pointed to a sheltered area. "Perfect for gardens. The house needs work, but the bones are good." They bought it that afternoon, paying cash, which made Peterson's eyes widen but stopped him asking questions. Within a week, they'd moved in, their few possessions looking sparse in the larger space. "We need furniture," Isabel declared, hands on hips as she surveyed the empty parlor. "We need a bed that don't squeak." Coulter countered, making her blush and laugh. They threw themselves into building their new life with the same intensity they'd once brought to survival. Coulter hired local men to help repair the barn and fences, earning their respect with his knowledge and work ethic. Isabel transformed the house, painting walls, sewing curtains, coaxing the neglected garden back to life. The town accepted them easily. Coulter's war experience made him valuable when predators threatened livestock. Isabel's educated background led to requests to teach local children their letters. Slowly, carefully, they wove themselves into the fabric of the community. 3 months after arriving, on a foggy morning that turned the world soft and dreamlike, Isabel found Coulter in the barn and announced, "I'm pregnant." He dropped the harness he was mending, staring at her. "Are you sure?" "Very sure. The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday." She bit her lip, suddenly uncertain. Is this?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "How long?" 6 months, maybe 7 if all goes well. Spring baby." She touched his face as he set her down. "You're crying." "Am not," but he was, just a little. "Spring baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. That night, they sat on the porch watching the sun sink into the Pacific. Isabel rested her head on his shoulder. His hand spread protective over her still flat belly. "You scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "But the good kind, the kind that means something matters." Winter came gentle to the coast, bringing rain that turned the hills emerald green. Isabel's belly rounded, and Coulter found himself talking to it when he thought she was sleeping, making promises about fishing trips and horse rides and all the ways he'd keep this child safe. The nightmares that had plagued them both grew less frequent. Sometimes Coulter still woke reaching for his gun. Sometimes Isabel still called out in her sleep, but mostly they slept peaceful, lulled by ocean sounds and each other's breathing. In February, a letter arrived that made Isabel go pale. Coulter read it over her shoulder, one of Thorne's former business partners, making veiled threats about contested ownership, suggesting a personal visit to discuss terms. "He's fishing," Coulter said, "hoping to scare money out of you. What if he comes here?" Coulter penned a response himself, in language that would have made a sailor blush, making it clear what would happen to anyone who threatened his wife. They never heard from the man again. As spring approached and Isabel grew heavy with child, they prepared the nursery. She insisted on yellow walls, cheerful for boy or girl. while Coulter built a cradle with his own hands, carving tiny horses along the rails. "You're nesting." "Mrs." Hoffman observed, visiting with a basket of baby clothes. "Is that what this is?" Coulter asked, watching Isabel rearrange the nursery for the 10th time. "All mothers do it. Fathers too, in their way. Why else you been checking the door locks twice each night?" He hadn't realized anyone had noticed. Old habits died hard. Labor started on a March dawn with the wildflowers blooming. Coulter had faced gunfights calmer than he faced this, pacing the hall while the midwife and Mrs. Hoffman tended Isabel. "First babies take time, Mrs. Hoffman assured him. "All normal." Normal. There was nothing normal about hearing the woman he loved in pain, unable to help. He nearly wore a groove in the floor before the midwife finally called him in. Isabel lay propped against pillows, hair damp with sweat, cradling a blanket-wrapped bundle. Her smile was exhausted, but radiant. "Come meet your daughter." A daughter. Coulter approached like the baby might break, sinking onto the bed edge. Isabel placed the tiny weight in his arms. "She's perfect," he breathed, studying the miniature fingers, the shock of dark hair. "What do we call her?" "I thought Sarah Emma, for those we lost. If that's not too painful." "It's perfect." His voice broke completely. "She's perfect. You're perfect." Baby Sarah seemed unimpressed with the sentiment, screwing up her face and wailing. Coulter panicked, but Isabel laughed, taking her back. "She's hungry. You'll have to wait your turn." He watched his wife nurse their daughter, and something in his chest expanded until he thought it might burst. This was what they'd fought for, bled for, traveled across a continent for. This moment in a sun-drenched room with the ocean singing outside and new life in their arms. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of feedings and diapers and tiny clothes. Coulter, who'd once stood down armed killers without blinking, was reduced to anxiety by an infant's cry. But he learned, as did Isabel, and slowly they found their rhythm. On Sarah's 2-month birthday, they walked to the cliffs, baby wrapped snug against Isabel's chest. The Pacific sparkled endless blue, and the spring air smelled of salt and flowers. "No regrets?" Isabel asked, slipping her hand into his. "Not one." He kissed her temple. "You? Only that it took so long to find you." They stood there, small family against the vast ocean, roots growing deep in this new soil. Behind them, their house waited, solid and welcoming. Ahead stretched years of ordinary miracles. First words, first steps, maybe brothers and sisters for Sarah. "Sometimes I dream this is the dream," Isabel confessed. "That I'll wake up back there, back then. Then we're dreaming together," Coulter said. "And I don't plan on waking up." Sarah fussed, ready for her meal, and they turned back toward home. As they walked, Coulter felt the last of his old ghosts slip away like fog burning off in sunlight. The man who'd lived for violence and vengeance was gone, replaced by this father, this husband, this builder of cradles and mender of fences, in the house, while Isabel fed the baby. Coulter stood at the window watching the sun set into the Pacific. Once, he'd thought his story ended in that desert ranch, heart buried with his first family, but stories, like lives, could have second chapters. "Penny for your thoughts," Isabel said, Sarah sleeping milk-drunk in her arms. "Just thinking how the mail-order bride saved the cowboy, not the other way around." She smiled, that secret smile that still made his heart race. Maybe we saved each other. Maybe we did. As darkness settled over the coast, they prepared for bed. Another ordinary evening in their extraordinary life. Sarah slept in her hand-carved cradle. Ocean waves provided nature's lullaby. And two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds held tight through the night, no longer calling each other's names in fear but in love, in gratitude, in peace. The cowboy who'd feared no man had found the only thing stronger than fear, a love worth living for. And the mail-order bride who'd cried his name in desperate dreams had found her safe harbor at last. Their story, begun in violence and shadow, had found its way to light. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. We'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from, whether you're driving through the desert, sitting by your fireplace, or maybe even somewhere unexpected. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and connections make our campfire circle complete. Happy trails. Partners.